Calling all educators, students, and space enthusiasts. The 2025 Small Sat Education Conference is where the future of space begins. Join us at the Kennedy Space Center for hands-on workshops, expert speakers, and industry networking, all focused on bringing small sat innovation into the classroom. Explore CubeSats, high-altitude balloon missions, and hands-on STEM workshops designed to launch the next generation of space explorers. Don't miss this chance to connect, learn, and innovate. Visit smallsateducation.org to register today. You can find a link in the show notes. Let's go to space, Blue Sky Learning, episode 151, on being a project component engineer. Today, we meet with Melissa Mecca. She holds a Bachelors of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Florida, where she graduated cum laude in 2021. And she now has 4 years of industry experience under her belt at Aerojet Rocketdyne, a segment of L3Harris, providing space and defense propulsion products. There, she supports the RL-10 program, which is one of the most reliable liquid cryogenic upper stage rocket engines. Currently, she works as a project component engineer holding the position of hardware management lead for the engine valves. She seizes opportunities to educate and inspire students interested in STEM by leading site tours and supporting recruiting events. And outside of work, she enjoys pickleball, salsa, dancing, and traveling the world. Let's check in with Melissa now. Welcome, Melissa Mecca. So excited to get to talk with you. I know that you worked with Kevin recently, and I'm just getting to meet you for the first time. But many of our audience members are also meeting you for the first time. So kind of tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in engineering and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, good morning. That's definitely a lengthier story. So I recently got to know Kevin after I gave a tour to some of his students at the site that I work at. But my interest in engineering goes way back. I would say it's something that I had a feeling I would be interested in. As a kid, I was always fascinated with, constructing, like building things. I liked my Tinker toys early on. But it's something I didn't know if I would have the grit to stick with. It always seemed very scary, having to learn about, advanced mathematics and physics. I felt like in middle school, I wasn't very good with math. But luckily, as I progressed into high school, I had a teacher, my physics teacher, that was very involved with a robotics club. And I decided to make the plunge and join after he, encouraged me to. I had started taking this physics class just to see if it's something that I could do. Like, if I wanted to try to pursue engineering, I may as well start small. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. It became my favorite thing. I did first robotics, and I was so excited to go every day and build our robot. And my teacher had been pushing me to start, trying to do summer camps or other activities outside the classroom to try to get me involved. And it led to me wanting to go to the University of Florida. One of my mentors in the robotics club, he was going to UF at the time in mechanical engineering, and also wanted to take us on tours of the campus and get us excited about engineering. And when I finally did start at UF, I was a little unsure of how I wanted to go down this path. There's so many different degrees, and the industry is very broad. So I started as an undecided engineer, and I took an intro to engineering class, which was very helpful to show us all the different engineering degrees and disciplines and what they all mean. Because I think it's a little unclear what it really means to be an engineer and what that day-to-day would look like. So that was really helpful to get a very broad view. And I had a feeling I wanted to do mechanical engineering, but I feel like I confirmed that when I started to realize it's a path that can take you to so many different places, where as with the more focused degrees, you don't have as much range, it would seem. So I decided on mechanical engineering, and I was lucky enough to get a few internships throughout my college career. So I did a internship with Cummins. They're a diesel engine manufacturer in Indiana. and I did one with a contract manufacturer in St. Petersburg, Florida, called Jabil. And then I had my final internship with Aerojet Rocketdyne in West Palm Beach, and it stuck. And somehow I came to the destination that I had envisioned for such a long time, and it had felt like such a huge accomplishment to make it into industry in a field that was one of the most like exciting and inspiring for a mechanical engineer. So I currently work at Aerojet Rocketdyne here in West Palm Beach, where we build, test, and provide upper stage propulsion for customers like NASA and ULA.
There's so much that you said there that was resonating with me as somebody who, and I'm an English teacher and debate coach, right? When I met Kevin, so I'm not STEM at all, but I work with our students, and so I've always felt the same way. Like, what does that mean to be an engineer in my mind? And I say this line all the time, so Kevin's going to hear it because I say it at conferences or whatever. But like, people assume that means, oh, if you're an aerospace engineer, for example, you must be an astronaut, or you're just, if they don't understand what that means to be an engineer, and they're so multifaceted. And then I think too, like you were saying, that you realized mechanical was more open. My son started off in aerospace and ended up going to mechanical exactly for what you were talking about, that it just opened up more opportunities. And so I think it's because it's a more multifaceted kind of focus.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know I didn't want to get involved in like the oil industry. Um, but other than that, like I didn't have like a clear vision of like, this is where I wanted to be. I feel like a lot of engineers I met, they're like, oh, I must work for NASA, or like, I really want to, go into this specific, like, airplane maintenance field. But
Right.
I truly just, ended up letting things play out the way they would, and keeping that like broad, you
Yeah.
know
Well, and it
keeping
sounds
myself
like,
with a mechanical degree.
right, and it sounds like your internships are actually broad. Like you mentioned one, I think that was like fuel related or something, right? And so that's how you
Cummings,
determined, oh, that
Cummings,
wasn't what
yeah,
I wanted.
the well,
Yeah.
either way, you got
Yeah,
experience, right?
that's
Even
it.
if it wasn't the perfect fit, it's still gaining experience. So I'd like to go back to your for our potentially for our students that are listening to some things you said. Number one, it sounds like you had a great educator at the right time that was able to help you get a little more confidence. You talked about being on a competitive team, a robotics team. You spoke about, maybe I thought I heard you mention summer camps or site visits perhaps to UF. All of these opportunities, would you say, I would, I see them as very positive on you, but I really want to nail down and go back to where you felt like you weren't good at math in middle school, because I think math anxiety is like a huge STEM career killer, right? If a young person has math anxiety, my daughter, what you said sounds like my kid, and she's a very sharp STEM professional today. Could you speak a little bit more about maybe delve into the math anxiety just a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I was lucky enough when I entered high school to have some really good teachers, and it wasn't maybe until I got to my pre-calculus and calculus teacher, that I started to feel like, I can really like get a hang of this. And I think this is something that like all students take, but um, not being deterred, and just you know trying to leverage like my peers. I think that helped the most at those stages of my education, and we would all like be helping each other. And even as I got into college, like learning that you are on your own, and there's a lot of people that are going through the same experience with you. So I think what got me through it was like leveraging all the other friends and peers in my class over this shared goal of trying to get through this mountain. At the time, would have felt like getting through like one of these classes. And without that support group of my peers, like sharing, study guides, and like helping each other with our homeworks, and like studying for quizzes. Like without that, I don't think I would have gotten through it. And with each like class that I would get under my belt, I just felt like a little more confident. Like and more confident with each one. Like if I can figure out how to, do calculus, well, I guess I can do calculus too, and so on and so forth. So, and I've always said like anybody can be an engineer. It's just a matter of like how badly do you want to do it? Like how much are you willing to like, you know, go through like how much grit do you have to like see through like getting that degree. So if it's not something that you want enough, you probably won't you know trudge through all of the work and all the exams to get to the end degree. And I think that's like very telling for a lot of people. Like some people, they think they do want to do it and they try it and they're just like, it's not worth it to me, like this is just so miserable. you know I can't push myself through it. But I always had that drive and that like want, like, and if it's something that this is the career path, like you want, like you will find a way to you know achieve what you really your goals, what you really want.
Yeah.
So for your engineering as a career billboard, it says endure misery and
Exactly.
misery loves company,
Well,
which is exactly the Army, by the way, right? As long as there's a group of you being miserable together, it becomes more tolerable.
Well,
Absolutely.
I take something a little different from that. And I think that it's important to realize, like you've mentioned, that you have to be able to want it. And if you know that you want it, that it's achievable. At the same time, you also acknowledge that you don't really know what engineering is. So that's a super hard position to be in, right? Like if you don't really have a feel, you might have had a parent who was an engineer. If you're a student who's like, oh, that's one, but that's just one kind of engineer. And it really is about, okay, well, what is it about this job? If it's not specific, like if some people go into teaching because they want to work with students or they love a content area or whatever. Engineering is so broad and so multifaceted. It's almost like, what are the characteristics that you see in yourself to say, yeah, I want to employ these? Is it that I want to tinker with things? I want to construct something or find out what makes things work. It's almost like an inquisitive nature as opposed to just saying, oh, I just want to, show up to Aerojet Rocketdyne every day, for a 9 to 5.
Yeah, definitely.
So as I'm thinking about, now here you are, you're at Aerojet. So out of the 3 internships that you had, this one you said stuck, and it seemed to be the one that you felt most connected to. What was it about this side of engineering that was what you decided to pursue?
Yeah, actually, I was affected by COVID with this internship, and it got canceled. So they were generous enough to give me an interview for a full-time position without the internship. But it's definitely like stuck out even as you know, have gone through my whole experience with them as a full-time employee. I think they've got a very strong like engineering, base at that site, and all, and historically as well. I think the other products I had worked on, it, like they weren't like all built, manufactured, and tested in the same place. So what's unique about the RL10 engine that I support at Aerojet Rocketdyne, the West Palm site, is it was designed in the 60s, and it's a historical site. And because of that, all of the a lot of the manufacturing, the assembly, and the test is done all at that site, which is very unique. Like a lot of other companies are not as established, and they have all of those different operations more spread out. So being able to have it all in one place is very, it keeps me more like in touch with what I'm doing, like where I can like see the hardware and be in tune with like the testing and the delivery of it. Whereas in my other experiences, it was much more spread out, and I didn't feel as like connected to the mission. So
Right.
uh, because of that, I have felt the most, inspired and like invigorated to come to work every day, uh, when with my experience with Aerojet Rocketdyne.
Right. So you're connected to your field. You're connected because you're not just building a little widget and then shipping it on to the next
Right,
place.
there's a lot of investment
You
there.
you see the vertical
Exactly.
integration. That's fantastic.
Right.
I'm going to throw out a question. This is sort of open-ended. We as educators, we often talk about the 4 C's for uh, helping students be their very best. So
You might want to remind the audience what to
yeah, the
say.
4 C's are collaboration, creativity, communication, and critical thinking, right? So in your job at Aerojet Rocketdyne, which of those four do you think you use most often every day? Collaboration, communication, critical thinking, or creativity? Or feel free to elaborate
Right,
in
because they're
any
just
way you would
soft
like.
skills, right? Soft
Yes.
skills versus hard skills.
But for our young engineers, right, our young students that want to be engineers, they can develop and work on those four things now. Tell us a little bit about how you use those four things in your everyday work.
So the ones that stuck out immediately were the collaboration and communication. I have always felt like that was like the crux of being a good engineer. If you can't inform, the other people working with you, like what's going on, then, things aren't really gonna, progress very well. So I've, you know, I found that as like a common thread, from, my college, experience up into my professional. I was talking about how I would, leverage all of my peers to get through these difficult classes. And it's the same here uh in industry. Like we're all still dealing with like complex issues. And I always think to myself, like, I feel like I should be able to solve more problems like on my own and not, get any help from my team. But I've come to realize that that's not the way to approach most things. We all are better, figuring things out together. The collaboration aspect of it, and that's like the way we're gonna resolve things the best. And, I don't know everything. All my peers together, like they know different aspects of how you know our site works. So that collaboration key is very key. And then communication, trying to like, have my team understand like what the problem is at hand, and clearly present that in slide format or in like lots of emails throughout the day that I'll send. So those stick out the most. And the critical thinking aspect of it, I think, comes in like right behind those two. So a lot of times it's not clear how to proceed with a lot of these tasks or issues that come up, and they're all different. So I can pull from how I handled previous issues or problems that come up. They're always like slightly unique. So I spend a lot of time like talking with the quality engineers or like design folks, like trying to piece the whole picture together so we can figure out like what are the details that we need to address and maintain cost and schedule. Those are probably the two most important things that we need to consider when making these decisions. So I think the critical thinking, like while we're all dealing with a problem together, how what all we need to consider, and and maintain what's important to getting the job done. And the creativity aspect of it, I think that's a muscle I flex, not maybe not as much as the rest of these, but I like to think that there's a creative ways of solving each problem. There's maybe like longer paths and shorter paths, and it always feels really good when we can knock out multiple birds with one stone, and minimize the amount of work we have to do. And I think that's where the creativity comes in, because otherwise it's like a pretty like prescribed procedure for certain things, or there are certain ways of doing things, but you can get a little more creative with like workarounds, or trying to find like more efficient ways of getting to that end result.
Cool. So I've had the privilege of having visited the site with kids for, I don't know, maybe four different times over the years. One thing I noticed different this time, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, and you're welcome to elaborate as much or as little as you'd like. But what it seems like is that you guys have a lot more orders, right? It looks like your manufacturing tempo has increased. And that, in my head, when you already mentioned costs and schedules, and you think about delivering to your customers, that adds a new level of complexity to your task of building a very complex rocket engine. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. The space industry has skyrocketed, pun intended, in recent years, where we used to only sell maybe 10 engines a year. And that was, a lot at the time. And there was always some looming rumors of, the program ending. This is what I've heard from, the people that I work with, since this is such an old program. But recently, the demand has far surpassed the supply, and we're trying to catch up. And also that there's another piece is like the competitive aspect is we're not the only propulsion provider anymore. There's a lot of private startup companies that we now have to compete with to maintain our business. So both of those things coupled together, the demand and the competition that is newer, has led us to have to change the way we do things pretty drastically, and we're continuing to do that. So our manufacturing floor, I think we've added like more machines, and it's probably busier than before, and in different ways. So there used to be a lot more hand work that went into these engines, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of labor. So we're trying to innovate ways to like reduce the number of parts in assemblies, and how can we leverage more modern manufacturing techniques like additive 3D printing of parts, which has become a very like central part of our engine at this point. And finding ways to work with our customer to understand like their requirements, and what do we need to actually like you know maintain like their vehicle and then the function of the engine, but also try to like streamline all the things that we need to address, paperwork wise, and the ethics of quality requirements. So we've like drastically changed, probably from like 5 years or 10 years ago to now. The way we move to try to like catch up the supply to the increasing demand and competition.
So I want to talk a little bit about, as you said, it's there's a history, right? There's like this legacy associated with the company. They take pride in a project, and they're building it all there. And I find that you probably are working with people from various backgrounds and generations, people who've been there from, for years.
40 years.
Right. So
Yes.
I'm interested in like the generational cohorts and how that works. So you're a young female coming in, and you probably have some older folks who've been around. Tell me a little bit about the dynamics of being a young female kind of coming into this well-established, company.
Yeah, that's very apparent. So there's definitely an age gap, if you will. So there's the boomer generation, the folks that are like heading towards retirement, and then there's like a big gap where people in their 50s and 60s are one generational group, and then there's really no one in between, and then there's younger folks like me in their 30s, 20s. And I think that this history has in the personnel has like ebbed and flowed with what's going on in the space industry. So there was like a major gap in jets, where a lot of these folks worked before rockets became more of a more of a demand. And there was a big lull in that industry when the space shuttle program ended.
That probably
And
would have
now,
been our generation, Gen X kind of people.
exactly, and now that
Yeah.
it's being revived, there's a lot more people my age. So it's actually very. I really enjoy having like older colleagues around me to fill me on the history, and not only with this specific program, but like how engineering used to be. So my mentor, I'm very lucky to have one of those older heritage legacy folks that's taught me everything I know. He's been with the company about 40 years, and he's approaching 70, but he has been absolutely crucial to uh, my development within the company as an engineer and getting to know the product, because he's been there so long. He knows so much, and I've gotten to learn a lot very quickly. So that's, he's one of the people that I credit with, getting me to where I am in my career. And also, when I hired in my manager at the time, she was, kind of one of the few in between folks, the Gen X in her 30s. And I was also very inspired by her very quickly. There weren't many female colleagues around me, and there still aren't as many, but in the younger generation, they're definitely hiring more. But
Yeah.
in her generation, kind of that in between, there were very few. So I think she had to buck up very quickly to be successful in her role. And but the first time I met her, I'll never forget, she was wearing like a bright pink um, dress, and she was not afraid to be like girly and feminine. And that's something that I had always tried to downplay as a female in engineering. I was like, I probably shouldn't wear pink nail polish or dress too feminine, because I don't want people to think I'm not serious, because I'm very serious about what I do. And she showed me that you can be, who you are, and people will take you very seriously. Like, she was very well respected, and one of the, you know, the brightest, best people, I think, in our team. So that was, instrumental to me to, relax and realize that, people will take me seriously, you know, in even if I express who I am, and not afraid to be like, a woman. So between those two mentors that I've had, that's been, very, very, I feel very blessed to have them both. 'Cause I know not everybody who has hired in around the same time as me have had that experience. And I think for the younger generation, there is definitely, a difference in the way that we work. The older folks, they um, maybe aren't as agile. They're very used to doing things the way they've always done them, where we're able to come in and see things a little differently, and move a little faster with the changes that the company is making.
I love that you're recognizing that there's a need for both, right? And we just did a podcast yesterday with a friend of mine who's actually an English professor, but she's become a welder later in life, and she loves it. But her whole focus now on writing this technical communication is how we learn in a trade field. And her big thing was she got mentored, right, by this guy who had his shop for 50 years, didn't have a degree, whatever, but he was an
Subject matter expert
in welding,
Yeah.
and she was an apprentice under him and learned so much. And now, exactly what you're saying, the idea that you're learning from somebody who maybe boomer generation, who had been there so long, might see things like kind of differently, but the wealth of knowledge that comes from that experience, right? And then I also like how you mentioned that it was probably a woman it probably more like Gen X, I think, is like, like the 50s. To be we're 50, the Gen Xers, so you're probably talking about a millennial in their 30s, right? Either way, I'm fascinated in general with how we know that we're different generations, but we have to work together. So you have these teams that have different groups that bring so much to the table differently, and you have to navigate them differently. So it sounds like you are getting the best of both worlds with that, the idea that you have a group that seems to be diverse,
Right.
at least as far as the age part is concerned.
Right. And when you shared about your onboarding with this older gentleman, you reminded me of when I was in industry. One of the companies that I used to support, they had a reduction. They gave like early retirement plans. And what happened was their productivity went down because they lost too much institutional knowledge. So it seems like you have the best, perfect world. You got somebody that could like onboard you, right? And really give you the rich. I mean, you're
And the
fortunate
skills,
because a lot of folks are, they're thrown out in the mix and they may not have that experience. So that's really good.
and not stuff that you would learn in a textbook or in school. It's the experience that they've gone through.
Right. I think this is great. So let's play that interview game where let's say you get what you want in the next 5 or 10 years professionally. What is the path for a young mechanical engineer that builds rocket engines at Aerojet Rocketdyne? Do you see opportunities ahead in management and what do you see as your future?
Absolutely. I want to like deepen my expertise with, the hardware that I work on, but also diversify. So I'm in a role where I'm very hardware focused, and I own a set of components on the engine that I see through, every aspect of what they need. So for the past 4 years, I've been focused on the valves, and I've, asked my management to give me the opportunity to, broaden my, experience with the different components. So right now I'm shifting towards different hardware to learn about, and it makes me like hungry to like know more. Like, I want to like learn about every component on this engine and become, almost like an RL10, hardware expert if I can. And also moving into leadership. So I was recently moved into like a hardware management leadership position for the valves team, and that's been unique for me to develop more soft skills in how to help my teammates prioritize when there's a lot on our plate, and understand like what strengths everyone has, and like who is better at what. So I think I'm better with, communicating with vendors and internally, in delegating, whereas someone else is better at the nitty gritties of, uh, understanding like the function and, maybe like doing a dimensional stack up or pulling, the CAD models to take a closer look at. So I want to continue to develop my leadership skills as well. And I do see a future for myself in management. I think that's definitely the avenue that I'm progressing towards. So yeah, both. Understanding the product technically and also how to function better in my team and move from a role of individual contributor to you know a firmer leader, and not just within my team, but also maybe multiple teams at some point.
Right. Well, I really want to, number one, remind you that you may or may not know, Shauna and I are both officers in the Palm Beach section of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, AIAA. And we would love to have a person like you be a part of our young professionals. And whether, and you may or may not know this, but a couple of our other leadership folks are Russ Joyner, who is nuclear propulsion at AR, and Joaquin Castro. And they're, as you would may imagine, they're great. They're just two of the best humans in the world. And I think another way that we would love to see you grow is maybe with the AIAA. I think you would be a great addition to part of the leadership of the Palm Beach section. Just throwing that out.
Absolutely. Yeah, Russ sits right next to me. So I've been meaning to talk to him about this since you mentioned it when you came for the tour. So I'm definitely looking for ways to expand, my involvement outside of the workplace.
Well, you definitely get to sit with a lot more older folks. Like
Yes.
you're already,
And
we're pretty old there, and we're kind of young in the old, but
and we've hung out with Kristen Johnson for a couple of times now at different banquets. I don't know if you know, she's sort of a big fish in the L3 Harris, organization with rocket propulsion.
who was the girl that first took us on the tour, whose name is escaping me? She,
Tour
Rachel, was it Rachel Garza?
that's Sikorsky.
Oh,
Different company.
different company.
She's a flight test engineer for helicopters, Rachel Garza.
Right.
Still Beeline Highway, right?
Okay, so I was in the right
Yeah, you're in
location.
the right
Okay.
industrial park.
Same neighborhood.
Yeah, well, listen, we really enjoyed. Number one, I'm appreciative of the interest and the time you gave my students.
Yeah.
So again, I always judge people on how well they treat our kids. So I want to thank you for that experience, and then of course taking the time to meet with us today.
And
It's
since
been
we're
a
talking
pleasure.
about the kids too, we always end with that last question, right? So kids listening today, what advice do you have for them who might be on that edge of thinking maybe engineering is for me, maybe it's not? Any final words of wisdom for anyone? Maybe even college students who are in that boat trying to like slug it out and make it to
Grinders,
the end.
anybody who's struggling to grind.
I think what immediately comes to my mind is don't be scared. This is something that could always turn into a different, a different path. So you'll never know unless you try and give it everything that you've got if you really want it. And if you realize that it's not for you, or it's just more effort than you're willing to put in, then you'll know when it's time to pivot. So don't be afraid to lean in and leverage the people around you. That's the most important thing that I've learned from, what my path to where I am now is, I didn't do it alone. I had really encouraging parents that would, give me that boost that I needed to keep going. And also all my friends that were going through it with me. So we all did it scared together, and we've all ended up where we wanted to be. So I think that's the advice I would give to your students and anyone, wanting to do something difficult.
Well, we really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Melissa.
You were great. Thank you. Have a great day.